Well, hello, and welcome to episode 37 of It's Never Sunny in Seattle, a Seattle Mariners podcast. I am Evan James, joined today by Michael Ahedo. And unfortunately, there's not much to talk about in terms of actual baseball news. The lockout continues. It sounds like there won't be any negotiations until at the very least mid-January. And there just hasn't been any news on that front at all. And kind of sucks, frankly. How are you feeling about it, Mikey?
Not not great. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of my expectation. It's been all along that I think, the players, the union and the owners are going to clash and really not be able to come to an agreement on anything for a while. But it's really not looking good. I don't even think they're going to negotiate for a couple more weeks. And even then, a lot of the players, there was maybe an article or some quotes that came out that was essentially like, they feel like they've been um, putting forth, reasonable offers for both sides, and the owners are kind of operating in bad faith. So that does not portend a season starting on time. So yeah.
Agreed. And even if the season does start on time, we're already kind of approaching a critical hour for just spring training to go ahead normally. Uh, so none of that's good. And there just isn't that much to say. And this is kind of like the deadest week. We're actually recording this on December 29th. And it's just been real quiet for a while. And we miss baseball, frankly. We really do. But there's big news today because just this morning, um, Julie Seager posted Kyle Seager's retirement statement on Twitter. And it's big news in a bunch of reasons, but I think primarily is because it still seemed like to most of us he had a pretty decent year last year and was in prime position, perhaps not to like continue to be an amazing player, but to put up another couple of good seasons to make another 50, $60 million if he, felt so inclined over a contract or two. And he walks away from the Mariners with the fourth most played games of any Mariners hitter, having played for the team for all 11 seasons. We were talking in the Slack today, and the statistic was thrown out that he's only the 13th player in the 2000s era to have played an entire decade plus career with one team, which is really, really unique and interesting, I think, in this day and age. If you go back further, it's a little more common, but it's just not a thing that happens much anymore. Um, Mikey, what does Kyle Seager mean to you? What is he? Do you think he's meant to the Mariners? And how hard is it going to be to replace him? Because I think that that's really one of the things we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. I mean, I still very vividly remember, those times where Dustin Ackley was my favorite baseball player for several years. It probably wasn't until he left that he wasn't. Um, and Kyle Seager was kind of my younger brother's boy. But I really remember, having to be excited about Ackley and Seager and Trayvon Robinson and Casper Wells. And it really, like, Ackley had that good rookie year and then really struggled. It really was just Seager, who, pretty much got a chance. And then after a season or two, just was one of the most consistent players in baseball for a decade. Um, and so, that's why he's the fifth best Mariners hitter all time in terms of WAR, F WAR. Um, Obviously, some of that is because he played for a long time, but also that's because he played for a long time. Um, like he hardly missed any games. And he was a bit like, it's weird to call him consistent because he was a bit of a streaky hitter,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of just output, um, you know, season to season, he was pretty reliable and really never hit below league average until the end of his career. And even then, he finished last year with um, slightly above average WRC plus. So I think it's kind of the Felix thing where towards the end of their career, they're not as good, and you start to appreciate them a little less. But it really sunk in when, during the last game of the season when they gave him the standing O, or we gave him the standing O because I was there.
Mhm.
Um, and just to see, how much he meant to the clubhouse and how emotional it made him. It's going to be really, really weird um, to not see him at third base. I'm really happy for him. He gets to spend time with his wife and kids, and they're going to be living on, I don't know. Kate said like a ranch or like a farm or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think that they have um, a decent enough replacements as is, and they could add. So I guess that's kind of a segue into how do we replace him? Unless you have any thoughts on just what he means to you, because I'm sure, for all of us, he means a lot.
Well, I think that I want to touch on two things. One of which is kind of in a meta context. He's the last holdover from the Zarenzik era, legitimately. For a long time there was Felix, and there was like Michael Saunders, I think, hung on for a little bit. But he represents an entire departure from whatever it is we used to be. And he was never the problem of any of those teams, frankly, that didn't go to the playoffs. Kyle Seager is blameless in the Mariners' lack of success. But what I did want to say is that it bothered me a lot that I wouldn't say I felt like I had to be critical of him this past season, but that there was open discord between him and the team, because I really like Kyle Seager as a player, as an archetype of a player. I liked him as a prospect. He was really exciting when he hit a 160 WRC plus in just a couple of games in AAA and really tore it up and kind of usurped Ackley as the Mariners, infield prospect of the future of note. He was the one who signed the contract. I didn't like that there was friction last year at all. And I understand why. And, hindsight is 2020, but I'm glad that we get to celebrate this now, even instead of in a couple of years, because it feels like a good time to look back at his career and be appreciative of just kind of how steady he was in such a tumultuous time across two different regimes of the team. And I wanted to say that Divish did a little interview on 710 this morning that I was listening to, and he mentioned that Kyle Seager hasn't really been healthy in a while in the way that I think he wants to be in order to play at his best. He mentioned specifically that he had some elbow issues that cropped up a lot last year that didn't keep him out of games. And, we talked about, it literally says in the notes here that he was, a model of consistency in terms of, staying off the injured list and playing all the time, almost every game for an entire decade. It was, the Cal Ripken thing. Um, and if he's retiring because he doesn't want to put his body through this anymore and he wants to go be a dad and not be sore, I'm thrilled for him. Like, go do it, dude. Have a blast. People shouldn't and can't do this forever. It's a really hard thing. And as somebody who's sore from the gym this morning, I wish him the best, and I'm really happy for him. Do you have anything to add?
I'm 27 and I feel like I don't recover well from the gym at this point. So it's like, I don't know, man. Take your money and yeah, go.
Mhm.
So
$100
yeah,
million dollars for the record. It's a lot.
right. So I just think it makes sense for everyone. I think him and his wife and kids, get to do their thing, and also he's projected for 2 WAR next year, and maybe you want to take the over on that. But as someone who's not a betting man, with that aside, I would not suggest that someone does that.
Mhm.
And that's over, like 600 plate appearances. Toro is projected for 2.4 WAR on the year.
Good
Uh,
segue. I like it.
yeah. And also 2.3 WAR at third base over 434 plate appearances.
Hmm.
And I think that's depth charts, so it's mostly steamer because actually it probably is taking zips into account. Um, I just don't think zips is available on player pages. But if you believe in zips and steamer, and maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, that means that Toro is not only kind of an equal player to Seager, but a little bit superior by FWAR. Not it's only marginal. but paired with like as is, you have Toro, you have Dylan Moore, you have Ty France and Kevin Padlow, I guess. Those are your players that you're projecting to get you 700 plate appearances. Um, I don't know how badly I want to see Ty France at third base defensively. I don't know how badly I want to see Dylan Moore get 133 plate appearances at third base.
Mm.
Which isn't to speak ill of Dylan Moore, but I don't know. Maybe if you're sprinkling them in over the course of a season, to me, and we are going to talk about Abraham Toro, to me, I don't love the idea of going into 2022 with Abraham Toro as your starting third baseman, counting on
Mhm.
him to get 430 plate appearances. I'm sure you'll agree, and we're going to talk about Toro. But I want to hear your take on, what are the Mariners going to do at third base? What should the Mariners do? Yeah.
I would like to see them sign one of the big names. And, we've talked about this at length really all year, coming into the offseason and the last couple of podcasts. I would be okay with Chris Bryant. I'd be okay with Trevor Story. Completely agree. I think that having Toro as the de facto guy is asking for disappointment, not necessarily because he isn't good, but just because there's so much uncertainty in his numbers. You know what I mean? Like, he hasn't actually performed that way in the major leagues across any kind of span where you can look and think, okay, we're going to pencil that in. And part of it is at this point where I'm a little greedy because I've had Kyle Seager for a decade. I'm used to third base kind of being settled and the Mariners having other positions of greater need. And that not being the case now makes me a little insecure about their infield. So, I might be a little biased in that sense, but I agree that Toro, I think in an ideal situation, Toro would play his way into the starting role, but you shouldn't plan on it. And they should be planning on somebody else filling those shoes primarily. Again, whether or not that's Story or Bryant or they trade for somebody, it remains to be seen, and it's not going to happen for a while. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, they have some work to do there, no question.
The thing is, so there's a lot of things bouncing around my head, but I would be comfortable if I don't know what this acquisition looks like, and maybe I'll have to pull up like a leaderboard of third basemen. I would be fine if they went out and they got someone who wasn't. I don't want to say like Toro because I'm like it's not like Toro is someone that he's like our third baseman of the future, but maybe he is.
Mhm.
So I kind of would like to see them go out and get someone like maybe like Hunter Dozier esque, who isn't very like he's not great, and actually he had quite a not great last season after they gave him an extension. But someone like Kyle Seager, um,
Mhm.
maybe like Ryan McMahon or someone like that, where you have a good floor, you have someone who can give you to WAR, and you don't have to rely on Toro. Also, that gives you the capability to move Toro around,
Mhm.
which isn't the greatest thing because his infield defense is still not that great. Once again, we will talk about this, but at third base since 2019, he has a +5 or +6 outs above average.
Mhm.
So he appears to be an average third baseman defensively at worst. He just needs to put it together with his bat. I am definitely pro going after Story or Bryant. I don't love Bryant. Um, he's projected for 2.7 WAR. That's not.
Really? That feels much lower than I would have guessed, just off the top of my head.
I think that. So first of all, that's Steamer. How much do you like Steamer? I don't know. I think that is probably going off of his down 2020, which
Mhm.
is a huge caveat. Like a bunch of elite players struggled and kind of bounced back after that. So there's that.
Did he have a
He
shoulder injury? Is that correct? In 2020?
that sounds right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Um, he's turning 30, which isn't old, but it's not young.
Mhm.
He also just has never really had great expected numbers. Um, he's just kind of he's been pretty like Seagarian in terms of playing pretty good base um defense at third. Um hitting pretty well. You know, he's obviously in terms of output been better than Seager, and earlier in his career was more of an MVP
Mhm.
caliber player. But really like hadn't struggled until 2020. So I think it really depends on the player that you think that Bryant is. And to speak for the ghost of Anders, who I believe is at work
Yes.
at Trader Joe's, uh,
Headers.
he does not like that the Giants don't think he'll age well, and I'm inclined to agree. Um, so
For the record, too, the Giants, of all teams in baseball, would seem to be the experts about who does and doesn't age well, right? Like, just based
yeah,
on the team last year, that's their whole
like
thing.
yeah, and actually that's a great point. So I don't know. I mean, he can move around too. I think he even plays some center field. Um, but it's like we already have a lot of guys who can move around and play poor defense at multiple
Yeah.
positions. Um,
That's our whole thing.
I will also say this is, there's not much here, but I think Paul Sewald went to a wedding with Bryant, and I think he's good friends with Bryant from their time question mark. I don't know. Um, but they're pals, so that's something. Um, I don't know. I have a hard time seeing the contract aging well.
Agreed.
Again, totally for paying a player. Want to see players get paid. It more so just has to do with how I think the Mariners will spend down the line. And like as is, he's probably an average fielder at third base. So that's only going to get worse, I imagine. Uh, and I think the same is kind of true with his bat. He can maintain, but I think he's going to get 5 years.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I will say, then I'll stop talking. But I do kind of think that a lot of teams, it only takes one team. I kind of think a lot of teams will be out on him, or at
Mhm.
least just not too hot to trot on signing him. So
Yeah.
maybe the Mariners can get him at something a little more affordable than, like what Fangraphs crowdsourced for, the estimates for contracts. Yeah, maybe he comes on, a deal that isn't gonna tie their hands for 5 years. Even then, it's like, who do they have to pay? You know,
Mhm. Yeah, that's the
I
thing is
guess.
they're not paying anyone anything, so
Hmm.
I wouldn't worry that much if they overpaid Chris Bryant. I especially wouldn't mind if they front loaded the contract. I understand that it's not in vogue to like do it that way, that most of these contracts, just because of the way inflation works, are set up to pay as little as possible as soon as possible and pay more later. But like it would make some sense where the Mariners are to pay him a lot for the next 3 years and then to have the money essentially fall off a cliff, like they're to sign him for I'm just throwing out a number, but let's say they sign him for 120 million. Why not give him 100 million over the first 3 years? And then, if he's got 2 years on the contract after that, give him 10 and 10. So that way, if he's, an albatross, it's not that big a deal compared to like the Pujols deal where he's making basically the same money for 15 years. It sure felt like, um,
And
yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
there's multiple ways to do it. I mean, yeah, one way is you can front load it. I think something that's been pretty popular as of late is the example I can think of is DJ LeMahieu, but I think some teams and some players come to an agreement on, um, a total dollar value, and then the teams like, I want to spread this out over time. we're going to give you that dollar value, but we're going to give you an extra year. So it makes it, a more affordable contract, on the year for LeMahieu. I'm trying to think. I feel like he got 6 years and like 90 million. So as opposed to 5 years and 90, I don't know, man. I'm not good at math. Is that like 18 and
So he
who's to
got a
say?
6-year, 90 million contract.
Let's go. I called it. Yeah.
Mhm.
So um basically, divide 6 by 90 and then 90 by 6 and 90 by 5. The Yankees save that every year. Um Obviously they're paying for it eventually, but in terms of luxury tax implications and whatever, that's becoming more of a kind of popular things that teams are doing.
Mhm.
So
Very
I
much
could
so.
see the Mariners saying, "Hey, we'll give you that dollar value over, if teams aren't going 5, we'll give you 5 years or we'll give you 6 years." Um, he'll be 36 at the end of that. What's Kyle Seager?
33, 34. I'll
That
get an
doesn't make me feel
exact
better.
count for the
Yeah.
listeners. He's
He
30
turns 34
34.
next year. Yeah. So, I don't know. Maybe Seager's a better defender. It really depends on his bat. Um,
Mhm.
but also most contracts aren't going to look good by the end. So, I think they have to give money to someone. And if Bryant's the only player that takes it or that will sign, give Bryant the money.
Mhm. And he'd be an upgrade. Like,
Yeah.
realistically, even if you buy the steamer, kind of like you're optimistic on Toro and a little pessimistic on Bryant, he's still likely to be better in terms of WAR than Toro over the next 2 seasons in particular. If you wanted to stretch it out further than that, it might be more of a wash. But like in the very immediate sense, the lowest WRC plus he's had outside of that 2020 season, basically in his career, has been 123. Like
Mhm.
he's a good hitter, even if he's can't really stick it over there. Yeah, I think we agree. He's not a perfect fit for the roster as is, but we need something, you
Mhm.
know. Um, it'd be really cool if Toro just came out totally on fire and absolutely owned that third base spot, but it does
Right?
feel like we're asking for a lot.
I guess the last thing that I'll say about Bryant is I just pulled up his numbers. Does 2019 to 2021 sound good? Is that too arbitrary? I think it sounds all right. It's
Why not?
recent.
Mhm.
So his in terms of outs above average, which I prefer over any other fielding metric because it's objective data, whereas the others I think are really susceptible to how the team shifts a player. At third base, he has a let's see. So all third base, I guess his starting position, -7 outs above average over 529 attempts, over 103 attempts in right field. He's -6, and in left field he's +1 at 91. So trying to think, that's a decent amount. Um, maybe maybe he's kind of a left fielder.
I
Maybe you're
don't hate
paying
that
him,
idea.
yeah.
I think that makes him much less of a fit with the team even than he already was, but yeah,
I mean,
like,
and
it's
you don't have to start him at left field every day, but it gives you flexibility, and you can move depending on how Toro hits. You can move the two around, and keep in mind they don't really have a good left fielder right now.
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't want to be mean, but I think right now it's trying to see. Let's pull up depth charts and
It's probably Jake Fraley, right? Like, right out of spring training, unless Julio makes the roster, it's probably Jake Fraley and Dylan
kind
Moore.
of. They are ranked 24th in FWAR in terms of left field output.
Not
Mostly
great.
Kelnick and Fraley. Did I dream that Fraley was DFA'd? Was that
Yeah,
not a thing?
he is not no, he's still on the team. It would've been
Well,
kinda nice, but no.
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, Fraley's not. It's not the worst. It's not the best.
I'm
Uh,
okay with it, and I'm okay with Fraley knowing that there are replacements en route, be it Kyle Lewis or be it Julio, that like he is whatever amount of plate appearances he's getting to start the year out of spring training, he's on borrowed time if he doesn't play well.
Julio, yeah. I
Yeah.
will say, with all honesty, I am cognitively, emotionally, going into the season expecting that Kyle Lewis does not play.
At all, you think?
Yeah. I just really love Kyle Lewis. I like his skill set. Um, his knees make me nervous, and yeah, I just kind of don't think he's gonna be healthy. I don't think he's a center fielder. Like, I don't think that he's healthy enough to play center field. So, I don't know who's your center field. Like, it's Julio. It's got to be Julio. Um, it just doesn't. The outfield situation does not seem great right now. You have
No.
Kelnick, who I think is going to take a huge step forward next year, but struggled mightily, like unprecedented levels. You have Kyle Lewis, who I don't know is going to be healthy. You have Jake Fraley, speaks for itself. You have Julio, who has not played at the major league level, and then you have Haniger, who I love, and Joe Doyle thinks we haven't seen the best of him, but also he has had huge amounts of health issues, and I think down the stretch really was not 100% last year, which is probably true of most players, but he does feel fragile. So
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So I personally read Joe's article like immediately before we did this podcast. Mikey, what is your opinion on that? Do you think we've seen the best from Mitch Haniger? Because I have an opinion on that is not necessarily in line with Joe, but I want to know what you think.
Um, I think in terms of, if you think about it in terms of like a rolling graph, like have we seen the best 30 games from Haniger? I think so. Um, the thing is that he hasn't. I mean, he had a 4.5 win season in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think that's the best hitter that we see out of Haniger, and I don't see him getting any healthier. Like, he at times did not look very spry, like in right
Yeah.
field. Um, I think he does really unconventional training, and I think that will help him. I honestly think that will help him more than if he were to just, get with a more conventional trainer. But it's like, how much is his defense going to improve? How much of it is his base running going to improve? I remember they did want him to steal at one point before he got hurt. They were trying to, I think, get him, to 10 or 15 stolen bases on the year. But
Yeah, didn't
157
make
games,
that.
157 games and 137 WRC plus, that's really good.
Mhm.
That's 40% above league average. I would be thrilled if they got one season like that out of him.
Yeah.
Because,
Um,
I mean, it takes good enough base running and defense and also very good hitting. I just, like, it's nothing against Hanny. I just think it will be hard to do that. He'll be 31. So I think I tend to agree with you, although we could see, actually, I wonder if that's maybe not the best comp, but I remember reading a Jeff Sullivan article talking about the transformation of Goody. I don't know if you remember
I do remember this. Yeah. I
late
remember the
career
article.
Goody. Uh, he just became nothing like the fielder that he was before. He saw the same instincts, but like just was not healthy. But he raked. He hit for a ton of power. Um, Hanny hit 39 dingers this year. That could be kind of what Hanny becomes, is a healthier late season or late career Goody. I don't know.
It's not a bad comparison. I think that how should I put this? That 4.5 win season in 2018 feels a little bit like an outlier to me when I'm looking at just literally staring at his Fangraphs page. Maybe outlier is the wrong term, but when I'm looking at his season last year, that 2.8 WAR, 120 WRC plus, with kind of the below average defense out in right, that seems dead on to who he is and what his archetype is as a player and what you would expect from him. If you told me Mitch Haniger was going to put up 3 WAR next season, like I'd buy that in a heartbeat, which is
Mhm.
technically better than he played last year. Um, I don't know if I buy 4.5 or 5. He basically had the same slugging percentage in 2017, 2018, and last year, and he has pretty disparate WAR values in those years. And it's
Mhm.
like I agree with Joe's assertion that yeah, he can hit for a little more power, but I don't know if the average is ever coming back. And I think, like you said, his legs look kind of busted out there in right field. No
Mhm.
offense to Mitch. And I really, we had the podcast last year where we had his trainer on for Lookout Landing. Thought it was fascinating hearing that guy talk and just what he had to say and
Mhm.
the way he trains and stuff like that. But what I ultimately came down to was all that stuff is really good theory, but statistics only matter, in like a meta context. The individual has to go out and perform. And Mitch
Mhm.
has not really like been any kind of outperformer of any metric by any specific amount. Maybe I'm making this very obtuse. I guess I don't think there's specific evidence that shows that whatever it is that he's doing is going to make him some kind of exception to the rule. Is
Mm.
that fair to say? Like, I agree that it will help him age gracefully, that it's good for him, that it's made him who he is. But I don't know if just because he does these kind of cutting edge training techniques that as a 31-year-old, he's going to put up a career season after being nearly 5 WAR in 2018. Um, that's
I definitely I think I think rationally, logically, that makes sense. Maybe there's an emotional component to this. To
Mhm,
me, and I think 99 times out of 100, that should be, the assumption is that the player is not the exception to the rule. That's where
mm,
a lot of people fall susceptible, especially when using sabermetrics, is saying, this guy gave up a 320 Expo Bacon last year. He is now a contact suppressor. He is a barrel suppressor, and that's not
mhm,
really true of most pitchers. Um, at least in my head, I think it makes a lot of sense. The way that he trains, he he's using a lot of muscles that you wouldn't generally use in more conventional training methods. He's
mhm,
using a lot of his core. Um, so I don't know. There's just a part of me that believes that it's going to work. Um, but I'm not going into the season thinking that it is going to work.
mhm,
Um, Also, just to kind of clarify in terms of like Joe's article, it's called Mitch Haniger's Just Getting Started. So he's not necessarily saying Hanny, I don't know if we ever said this, but he's not saying we haven't seen the best of him. But I think most of what he's saying is that he still has plenty left to go, which I think you can make the argument for. It's mostly just how is his body going to hold up. Um, so I think the Mariners need to put him into a position where he's able to rest regularly.
mhm. Yes,
Give
very
his
much
body
so.
some breaks. Um, but I believe in his ability to hit. He hit for as much power as he ever has, raw power, in 2021. We did see the walk rate come down. We saw the strikeout rate um, go up a little bit from his career average, but also it was down 4% from his 2019, which was shortened because he got hurt. But I really believe in Mitch, and I think he's a really really great clubhouse guy. I think they should extend him. Um, and he's one of the very very few hitters that I've seen quoted talking about like spin coming off the bat, and um, I think he's going to be a really great hitting coach one day.
I agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe this is sacrilege to say, but I'm kind of interested in the idea of him DHing more than he plays right field. Like if you really wanted him to get back to those 2018 numbers, that 137 WRC plus, I think that that's a lot less out of the question. If, like you said, you're resting the man, you're giving him days off, and you're not making him play the field, where his defense has very evidently, in the statistical and just visual sense, scouting him, degraded a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and like I realize we have Ty France, but lucky for us, he can play first base, it turns out. So, yeah, we could let Mitch DH like 3 days a week. Like, that'd be tight, right? That makes a lot of sense to me.
There's also that, he was injured, but in 2021, 316 attempts and -7 outs above average. So, yeah, do you want him in right field every day? Probably not.
Probably not.
I mean, I'm comfortable with him out there. It's not like he's a farce, in right field, but yeah, I mean, the more that you can give guys, time, I think there's kind of a balance because guys need to be regularly, playing out in the field if they're
Mhm.
going to be in the field.
Yeah.
But also, the more days off you can give him, the healthier he's going to be, the better his defense should be. So I think it's kind of a balancing act, but I think you should be looking to add 1.5 outfielders. I don't know.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
And maybe one of those is Julio. There is a version of this, and I think the next Lookout Landing podcast we're going to do a Julio special. That's a little preview here for those of you who listen to both of them. But like the wild card in this is Julio ready? Does he come out the gate swinging? Is his defense ready to play in right field? It could get really interesting. You know what I mean? Like, there's definitely an expected way I think this is going to shake out, and Mitch is going to be in right field most of the time, and Julio is probably going to start in AAA. But there are versions of this where it goes better than expected, and that takes a lot off of Mitch's shoulders, like immediately, which would be great. Which would honestly be great. So yeah, that's a lot more than I actually thought we were going to talk about Mitch Haniger. He's kind of an interesting case study for where the Mariners are at and
Mhm.
kind of the moves they should make.
We
But
almost
why don't
didn't
we
talk about
pivot?
him.
I'm glad we took that little detour. But I
Yeah.
want to pivot and talk about someone very dear to both of us. Our young future Cy Young, potentially, maybe, but he pitched very well in his rookie season, Mr. Logan Gilbert. John wrote a great article on his fastball, but you and I have talked a little bit more disagreeing with some of those perspectives, and you obviously are much more articulate when it comes to these specific details. So I want to let you explain to everybody maybe what's going on with Logan Gilbert in the fastball.
All right. I've been trying to be better about this, so rein me in if I'm getting a little too complex, so I can kind of give a Logan Gilbert for dummies uh, explanation. But
No, get
essentially,
into the weeds, man.
all right,
Let's get into the weeds.
that's
Let's do it.
fine. I think what we want to start with, because John's article is called "Identifying and Improving Logan Gilbert's Incredibly Obvious Weapon." That's his fastball. So we should talk about his fastball first, because he throws his fastball, I don't know, over 60% of the time. 61.5 to be exact. One of the main things, if you want to think about fastball shape and the efficacy of a fastball, is what is their vertical approach angle. And I've mentioned this several dozens of times. But vertical approach angle is the angle in which the ball enters the zone, the vertical angle that it does. So if you have a flat vertical approach angle fastball, like Paul Sewald or Garrett Cole, you want to throw that sucker at the top of the zone. If you have a steeper fastball or sinker, you want to throw that at the bottom of the zone. I'm trying to think of a good Justice Sheffield has a very, very, very steep fastball and sinker. Logan Gilbert coming up, we talked about him like he, people gushed about his pitch extension and how he gets 7 feet plus out in front of the mound and how he's long and how it looks like he's reaching out and just dropping, the ball in the zone. And I think hitters really corroborate that, but I don't think about extension in the way that most people do, because I don't think there's great evidence for extension really leading to whiffs in a vacuum.
Mhm.
Before this podcast, I actually just pulled up a random query and I don't know if this is the best way to go about it, but I just went from 2018 to 2021, sorted by fastballs and put the minimum at 1,000 pitches. I just wanted to see the R squared between fastball pitch extension and whiffs. And the R squared is 0.04, which means that only 4% of the variation in the data can be attributed. So like only 4% of fastball swing and misses can be attributed to fastball extension. That's not very much. I
Would that
will
be within the margin of error for a statistic like that anyway, to the degree where you could say it's almost negligible?
I think so. I mean, I could find a really silly, and I'll just do it right now. I could find a pretty silly stat that like let's see. So spin rate is 0.12. That's not silly, but like exit velocity, well, that's not a good example actually. I'm trying to think of a real silly one. Like total pitches. That's 0.01. Pitch percentage is infinity. um, Launch angle, like that's 0.09. So that's a more robust, I will say it is more robust than like vertical movement, but but that also might be because we're folding in. Well, I don't know. Who cares? What I'm trying to say is, yeah, it is like negligible and not. It's not super significant. Um, I will say that most stats aren't. Like if I use pitch velo, so fastball velo, right here, it's 0.15.
Hmm.
So all of these factors are adding up to create swings and misses. So I guess another way to think about it is fastball velo is about 4 times more, contributes to 4 times more of the variation in like swings and misses. So that was a huge tangent to really just talk about how extension matters, but extension matters a lot more when you're talking about, I guess, to use vertical approach angle as an example. If you have bad extension and you also have a bad, quote unquote, bad vertical approach angle, like let's say it's below -5%, you want to throw from a very high release point because the ball is steep, you're pairing a steep release point with a steep pitch. Um, but if you have good extension, that means that you're releasing the ball farther out front, um, which means it's going to be lower. So, um, I mean, Logan Gilbert does have a really high release point. Extension isn't. I wonder if people would say that. I don't think it's good in a vacuum.
Mhm.
Um, where I think extension really matters is with guys like Paul Sewald, who has elite extension. He drops down really far, and having gyro spin or inefficient spin on his fastball allows his fastball to play up.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and so I think really when you're looking at extension, a lot of the time you're looking at the low arm slot guys, whether their spin efficiency is in the low 80s or high 90s, it's good. But I don't. This is really just a really long way of saying I don't think that effective velocity matters as much as people talk about it as.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
I think
And
the
specifically for
research is
Logan, we
mixed.
don't see evidence of this, right? We don't see a specific reason in any of the pitching metrics to say that like, hey, it looks like his effective velocity is really creating some kind of deception that's getting out. It's like we don't there isn't evidence of it really.
Yeah. I mean, if we did, he would throw way more strikes, because he throws his fastball hard. The thing is, um, getting back to his vertical approach angle, his is -4.81, which in a sample of 182 pitchers. He ranks 73rd, which is around guys like Sonny Gray, which is not great. It's below guys like Lance Lynn, which is good. It's above guys like Tyler Glasnow and Robbie Ray and Zach Gallen, but it's also around guys like, I don't know, Keegan Aiken and Mike Fultonevich. Like, that is not, metrically, this is not an elite fastball. And I think I might be like burned at the stake or whatever the saying is. But I don't find his fastball as compelling as I once did, because the metrics don't align with what I was told from scouts and from, people just said, he has great extension, he has high spin, it should play, and it did play against minor leaguers, but I think we're coming to find out why it's not playing, and that's because it by vertical approach angle, which is not the end all be all. It's just not elite. It's not even, like, I don't even know if it's above average, but like the cutoff point for if you want to reshape or take, a four seam fastball and turn to a sinker is -5 vertical approach angle. He's at -4.8. So it's really just like the shape is not that good, and that's why his called strikes plus whiffs is not good. But if you fold in foul balls, which John is talking about, it's better. And so there's an argument to be made that he's not tunneling his pitches well because his release point's a little different for his slider and his curveball and his fastball and his changeup. But I have heard that the data shows that a release point, in terms of picking up the difference between a pitch, has to be 3 balls away, I guess, in, what is it? Diameter? Radius? Diameter. The diameter of 3 balls, which is a lot. That's like 9 or 10 inches, I think.
Yeah, at least.
So
At least 9 inches.
I don't think he's that far. And I just don't find that argument all that compelling. So maybe, and I still like Logan Gilbert plenty. That he was able to lean on this fastball 62% of the time and be successful is a good thing. But
unquestionably so.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I think that we've talked long enough about him, and I think we still want to get to Abe Toro, that we might even talk about him next podcast. But essentially, I don't think I would describe any of his offerings as plus if you're talking about stuff and command, because I think in terms of stuff, I think his fastball's pretty good, and I think his changeup's really good, but he has like no feel for his changeup, and his fastball command goes in and out. I feel like there's so many rabbit holes I want to go down. I did see, let's see if I can find it, from Dan Aucoin. I think that's how you say his name. He posted a list of guys. I believe they're fastballs. So they layered in intended zone data into their pitch model to give players credit for hitting or missing their spots. One of the pitchers that benefited the most from that was Logan Gilbert, which means that he does hit his spots a lot, which was surprising to me, because at least anecdotally he misses up an arm side so much. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is I don't think his fastball is a 60-70 grade pitch like people talk about. I think it's a 50-55 grade pitch. I think that his changeup has a ton of promise, but like his fastball or his curveball is not firm enough, and his slider, while it flashes, I don't think is an exceptional pitch. I think it's tops out at 55, maybe. So I think the biggest thing for him going into next year is repeatability of his release point, because that means he's going to spot his pitches more. And if he does that, I think his stuff's going to play. But I don't think this is the number one pitcher that people might have been expecting.
Yeah, and when you say all of that, it sounds more in line with like the guy he was kind of expected to be in scouting circles than kind of like the prospect hype around him that grew up over, maybe like the last couple of years when he wasn't even pitching all that much, frankly, because of the alternate side and stuff. Um, I agree. And I think if all that sounded negative and like we're down on Logan Gilbert a little bit, but it's more from a perception standpoint because we also agree that he had a weird season last year. He was supposed to pitch in AAA for a while because the Mariners blew out three pitchers' arms in the span of like 2 weeks. They needed to call him up right away. He adjusted to major league pitching well, but it did take a while. There is some variance in his statistics over the course of the season, and he did pitch better in September. If you wanted to take like a ray of sunshine away from this, it would be that we do think he can improve across the board, maybe even just slightly. You know what I mean? Like it's possible he sharpens up the fastball command and some of the secondary offerings just a little bit. And even if these numbers, as you described them, don't fix themselves, just him being a little sharper around the edges makes the difference between him being like, kind of a suitable number 4 and more of a number 2, which is kind of like, what we thought he might be all along. So book is not closed on Logan Gilbert, but a mixed results so far. None definitely to say. Um, do you want to do a little Abe Toro talk before we head off today?
Yeah, we love Abe Toro in this house. We love Abe Toro.
We do love Abe Toro. Different house, but I also love Abe Toro.
True.
But Mikey has been working on an Abe Toro article, so tell us what's up. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah. It is currently, I think, called Abraham Toro has some Thai France in him. I will probably rework that title, but the premise is that if you look at the two, their output has been pretty different in some ways, and in some ways it hasn't. If you look at peripherals, it's been similar and different. If you look at um, just how they've hit, um, Toro is ranked in the 73rd percentile since he joined the Mariners, while France has ranked in the 82nd percentile. Oh, that's not true. I'm looking at something else.
Lies.
I don't know where it is. I don't know where I put it. Oh, okay. Oh, this is all right. This is pretty cool. So France is 79th since he joined the Mariners next Woba, and Toro 61st. So they've both been good. They've both been above average hitters since joining the Mariners. It's just that Toro hasn't really hit all that well, aside from the couple weeks and maybe month after he joined the Mariners.
Mhm.
Whereas France has been pretty sick the entirety of his tenure with the Mariners. I don't think that they're the same hitter, but I think in a vacuum, um, they're pretty similar in terms of contact, um, and plate discipline. And when you look at their ability to impact the ball, I also think they're pretty similar. I mean, this year Abe Toro's max EV was 109 miles per hour. I think for France over his career, it's been 111. So that's better. That's 2 ticks. But it's also kind of negligible. Ty France, I think he's the kind of guy that I think scouts just say like this guy is just going to hit. And I think that was always going to be true of him. I think he has really good, bat control. And he doesn't barrel the ball. Like he doesn't get into pitches a ton and just send them 500 feet like Julio Rodriguez might. But he just is pretty constantly hitting the ball pretty well. Um, I think if you look at dynamic hard hit percentage, it will say, fuck no, you're wrong. But I think he's someone who just hits the ball in the right spots.
Mhm.
And I think that is kind of corroborated by his standard deviation of launch angle. So essentially, he doesn't hit too many, too many worm killers into the ground, and he also doesn't hit that many pop-ups. The difference between the two, I think right now, is I think Ty France just hits the ball a little harder, but also he has been much better, specifically this year, at not hitting the ball to the opposite field and pulling the ball. So like this year, I think Toro's pull percentage was like 29%. That's really low. That the league average is almost 37. So I've talked about this a lot, and I think about this all the time in terms of hitters, and it matters more now with the new ball. But in terms of drag, balls drag the most when they're going to opposite field. They drag the next most when they're going to the pull side, and they drag the least when they're hitting up the middle. Because balls have the most side spin when you hit them opposite field, which is why they hook so much. And then they have some also when you pull the ball. So, because they both don't impact the ball like, I don't know, Mike Stanton or Giancarlo Stanton, they are best suited at either hitting balls in the right spots, hitting balls at the gaps or pulling it. And Toro doesn't do that. And because he's even worse at Ty France of hitting really high fly balls, the data won't catch it in terms of pop-ups. He doesn't pop the ball up really, which looks good because that you think that means that he's getting the barrel on the ball more. But Toro hits maybe not an inordinate amount of high fly balls, but he hits a lot of high fly balls that pretty much never fall in unless they're going over the fence. So as far as I see it right now, the difference between the two is yes, Ty France does just hit the ball better, for lack of a better term. Like he just gets the barrel on the ball more. But I think that it can be chalked up to timing. And one thing about timing is the easiest way to pull the ball is to get out in front, catch the ball out in front of the plate, and send it to your pull side. I think that Toro has struggled with that in part because he's a switch hitter. I think it's harder to kind of progress. And I think there's data to support that. He's had to kind of, find his timing, his stroke from both sides. But also, most people don't really recognize that he came into the league at 22. He's 24. Ty France is 26. So, in terms of WOBA, they had pretty much equal seasons in their age 24 seasons. Next year could be the year for Abraham Toro. And we know, and I know that you listen to the Shannon Dreyer podcasts, the Mariners really, really, really like Toro. And I think there's a reason for that. It's not because he has wheels, which I will say, and I touch on this in the article, is an underappreciated part of his profile. It's not because of his glove. Again, I talked about earlier, at third base, he has pretty decent defense, which we do not recognize him for. But I think he's going to hit next year. He has too much of a track record. Scouting people that I like him too much for me to not believe in it. And he has all the skills that you want him to. He has good plate discipline. He has good contact skills. And he can, barrel up the ball. It's just a matter of getting to it. So when we got him, there was a quote where Divish said essentially, Toro said that the Mariners had been working with him on the timing of his leg kick. If he can dial that in, I think he's going to be nasty. I think he's going to be such a good hitter. I think him and Ty France are going to be like and Kelnick are going to be the three best, most like pure hitters. So I've been really high on Toro. I remain really high on Toro. He just right now is pretty much just hitting too many balls to center and opposite field. The ones to center aren't carrying out because he doesn't have enough power. The ones to opposite field are really not carrying out because they're dragging more. So I think the fix is work on that timing in a vacuum, but also try and pull the ball more. And also, it might be worthwhile to give up hitting from the right side, which is kind of a hot take, but we saw Cedric Mullins do it. So
yeah, and he had a heck of a year.
He did MVP esque year. So in these houses, we love Abraham Toro.
We do. And I thought all that was great. Like, I really do. I agree with all of it. I think all that's great. I think that Major League Baseball is so hard that sometimes guys just, even if they have all the skills, it can still be hard to succeed, which is, not a complicated thing to believe. But if you really wanted to look at Toro, and I recognize that he hasn't gotten quite the prospect clout or, rankings as a lot of other big names have, but like his minor league numbers are pretty fire, man.
They're good.
Like, dude, in 2019, he had a 179 WRC plus in AAA. Like, that's very good.
That ain't bad.
That's really, really freaking good. He batted 424, 506, 606. Like, those are insane numbers. Those are like, kind of like you said, those are Ty France numbers. There's that dude is in there somewhere. So whether or not he metastasizes and materializes as that, I think is still an open question. But I think that we have definitely, there's some bias because we watched him play and not be all that great at second base in particular. I would love nothing more than to see him have a killer year at third base. I think that would be a boon for this team. I think that would be, just in terms of resource allocation, that would really stick it to Houston in a big way. And big fan of that. Big fan of that. So he's probably, other than obviously Julio and Jared, because they're the literal chosen sons, he's probably the guy I'm most excited to see next year. Because I agree. I just think that he has so much potential to be more than we've seen him so far. And I don't think that's something we can say about all of the Mariners, even some of the younger guys. Godspeed, Kyle Lewis.
Yeah.
But I'm literally so heartbroken.
I mean, yeah. I think I'm kind of expecting a Ty France light season next year. And we talk about his third base defense, and I think we agree that we think that he can hack it there. But his work isn't done with Perry Hill in terms of second base. He hasn't had a full offseason with him. He's only had months. So I'm very, very, very excited to see, what we see out of Toro in 2022.
Agreed. And I think that the most likely course is that he's kind of a utility-esque guy and he plays backup third and then backup second when Frazier isn't playing. I routinely forget that Frazier is on this team. It's just like, for whatever reason, I can't get that to stick quite yet, but I realize it did happen, and he is playing for the Mariners, in fact. So
I think he's just not sexy news. Is the thing.
Yeah, like he's actually good. We just don't. He's just not very.
He's just not sexy. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not sexy.
But
you heard it here first. Adam Frazier, not sexy.
Ty France and Abe Toro aren't necessarily sexy.
Have you seen Abe Toro? Okay, I don't know, man. Abe Toro is a sexy man.
All right, I just don't know if we were talking about like Adam Frazier hits for power like JP Crawford. Like, that's not sexy. But physically, Toro is sexy. So
he's a stallion, man.
Yeah, look out for that. And I don't know when this will go up, but probably the next day or two.
Yeah. So we'll call it there for today. I'm Evan. You can find me on Twitter at Evan James Audio. You can find Mikey at DisThyMikey. You can find Anders when he returns from work at Anders Jorstad. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts, wherever it is you stream. We're going to upload this to YouTube this time. We're going to try and up the production values a little bit for both this and the Lookout Landing podcast that I've been working on for the next season to kind of, kick it into high gear with the new Mariners competitive vibe. So be looking forward to that. Thank you for listening. Go Mariners.